Dr. Marcus Chen had spent months aboard Helios Station, a remote solar observation post orbiting dangerously close to Mercury. There, enveloped in hard vacuum and silence, he monitored fluctuations in the solar corona, brief but powerful distortions that didn't follow any known model. One afternoon, his spectrograph showed something unusual: sharp, chaotic spikes in solar radiation. It was like a ripple through the very structure of light, as if something were disturbing the sun itself. Moments later, Helios Station shuddered without warning. High-velocity micrometeoroids struck the hull, tiny fragments, accelerated by the same solar irregularity he had been studying. Warning sirens echoed through the lab. The lights dimmed to a pulsing crimson. Then came the hissing of atmosphere escaping through unseen breaches. Marcus ran for the emergency capsule, but the station split apart around him like shattering glass. He was thrown into space. The cold hit instantly. His suit strained to compensate, but it wouldn't hold for long. He was tumbling, drifting, weightless and blind. There was no up or down, only the burning sun on one side and endless black on the other. Then, just as consciousness began to fade, something wrapped around him, smooth, warm, and utterly alien. A translucent membrane enveloped his body. The pressure stabilized, heat returned, sound dulled into deep underwater echoes. His damaged suit disintegrated within the cocoon, and then came darkness. He awoke inside a glowing corridor. The walls shimmered like organic crystal, pulsing in soft waves of blue and amber. Everything, floor, ceiling, lights, seemed alive, gently vibrating as if breathing. He tried to stand, but the floor shifted beneath him, adapting to his movement. It wasn't metal, it was something grown. 3 figures approached, all humanoid silhouettes, made entirely of shifting, luminous filaments. Their bodies flowed with photon streams, forming limbs and torsos that looked more sculpted by light than matter. They stopped at a distance, and a soft hum filled the air. Without a word, a hexagonal field grew from the floor around Marcus, humming as it scanned him. He didn't resist. He lifted his hands in peace. When speech failed him, he tapped his chest, steady rhythmic beats, heartbeats. The lights on the floor flickered, as if responding. A 4th figure entered with softer tones and more defined features. It approached and extended a ring of light that hovered near its throat. The air vibrated with a harmonic resonance. Then came a voice, filtered and artificial, but understandable. "Danger. Past. You are safe." The hexagonal field dissolved. Marcus stood slowly, and the ground lit beneath his feet with each step, reacting to him. The corridor led into a vast observatory, where he stopped, breathless dot beyond the transparent wall. Space unfolded, an ocean of dark speckled with starlight. The shattered remains of Helios Station floated in the distance. Streams of solar plasma rolled past the ship like waves of golden smoke. They weren't orbiting the sun, they were riding it. The smaller being joined him. She touched a crystalline surface, and a projection bloomed into the air. Constellations Marcus didn't recognize, marked with arcs and trails of energy. They weren't mapped by stars but by radiation flows. He was looking at navigation charts, made of solar wind. "We are Photon Nomads," said the voice through the ring. "We live in light. Our vessels are symbiosis. We feed them, they carry us." She introduced herself as Lyra. From the crystalline wall emerged a translucent panel, displaying patterns that morphed into visual frequencies. He could understand language through light, meaning through motion. They were inviting him to learn. He understood, then, that this wasn't a ship in the human sense. It was a being, a symbiotic vessel, as alive as its passengers. A culture built on motion, harmony, and light. They hadn't just left planets, they had evolved past them. Marcus breathed deeply, letting the low, melodic hum of the ship wash over him. He extended a hand. Fingers of warm light reached out from Lyra and brushed his wrist in response. It was a greeting, an acceptance then. "Let the light carry us," he whispered, and as the ship tilted slightly, gliding into a new current of solar radiation, Marcus felt something stir in him, not just awe, but belonging. He wasn't drifting anymore. He was moving forward. Time aboard the Nomad vessel flowed differently. Without sunrise or clocks, Marcus learned to follow the rhythm of solar brightness, the waxing and waning of radiation that pulsed gently through the ship's crystalline corridors. Days bled into one another in a quiet, graceful routine. He studied, he listened, He walked paths of amber light and learned how the Nomads mapped space through waves and luminosity, not gravity or mass. Then everything stopped. Without warning, the entire vessel dimmed. The glowing walls faded to a dull gray. The melodic hum that had become comforting silence disappeared. Doors closed. Corridors retracted. Only one path remained open, leading Marcus to what the Nomads called the Hall of Stillness. He entered what felt like a cathedral, sculpted from black crystal. The chamber was immense, hollow, echoing with its own emptiness. In the center hovered a translucent sphere, pulsing faintly like a dying star. All around it, Nomads floated, hundreds of them wrapped in veils of dark light. There was no movement, no speech, only mourning. The sphere flickered and projected images into the air, memories filtered through nomadic thought. Marcus saw stars collapsing into silence, planets swallowed whole, civilizations erased without warning or sound. And then, something worse, a formless presence, orbiting a dying sun. It had no face, no language, only hunger, a living shadow. Later, in a quieter chamber, Lyra explained what he had seen. The entity had a name, at least, as close as their language allowed: the Devourer of Suns. For generations, it had chased them across the stars. The Nomads were not wanderers by choice. They were refugees, survivors. Their vessels, beautiful, living ships, were arks, carrying the last remnants of a civilization that had long since abandoned solid ground. The Devourer moved with purpose. It didn't just consume energy, it sought consciousness. Wherever life gathered, it followed. It hunted density, awareness, thought. Marcus asked to see the stellar maps, every system lost, every path abandoned. The data aligned with precision and horror. The entity didn't move randomly. It followed patterns, gravitational, radiant, sentient, and the pattern had a center. He added Earth's coordinates to the projection. The result made his stomach twist. The trajectory was clear. The next target was the solar system. He stared at the highlighted point, Earth, luminous at the heart of a spiral of vanishing stars. It seeks where minds are brightest, Lyra said. You shine too brightly. Marcus stepped back, pulse racing. It felt impossible, absurd, and yet entirely real. The signs were all there. The anomaly he had studied at Helios. It had been the first ripple, the first breath of the approach. He thought of Earth, of people walking unaware beneath blue skies, building cities, arguing over nothing. They had no idea what was coming. He barely understood it himself. And still, out here, in the presence of creatures who had lost everything and still chose to share their light. One thing became clear: this wasn't just their problem anymore, it was his too. The first warning came not from sound, but from sensation and ache in the light. Marcus was in the observatory chamber when the vessel vibrated with a subtle, unnatural pulse. The color temperature of the ship's walls shifted slightly, and Lyra entered without a word. She placed her hand on a node of the living crystal, and data flowed into the room like rising mist, space-time ripples, increasing in amplitude. The Nomads felt it before instruments confirmed it. The Devourer was moving. The entity had changed direction, accelerated. Somehow, it had sensed its next prey. The calculations were grim. In just under 3 Earth months, it would reach the solar system. Marcus stared at the projection. He'd hoped they had years, decades, maybe. But this was soon. The nomadic fleet was thrown into debate. Within the great chamber of convergence, a divide formed. One faction, the Fluents, urged continued flight. They believed survival meant remaining untethered, never lingering, never confronting. They had escaped before. They could again. The other faction, the Luminaries, demanded resistance. They had lost too much. Running had cost them worlds, memories, identities. If they fled again, what would be left to save? Caught between them, Marcus proposed a third path. Warn Earth. Humanity still had time to react. Maybe not enough, but some he believed a united defense could be possible, even if fragile. It was a gamble, but sending a signal came with risk. To shine is to speak, said Archon Solus, the ancient leader of the fleet, and to speak may summon what listens. Still, the council allowed it. Marcus composed a compressed data packet: coordinates, entity analysis, predictive models, nomadic telemetry. He sent it toward Earth, using the ship's focused pulse array. It might arrive. Someone might believe him. That night, Lyra showed him something else, an old nomadic legend, long dismissed as poetic myth, a prophecy. When the last aurora dims, a bearer of Earth's fire shall rise, not of light, but of choice, not nomad, but not alone. Marcus read it in silence. It wasn't a destiny he wanted, but as he looked around at the ships holding generations of memory, at Lyra's calm faith, he realized he no longer stood outside this story. The Devourer was not just a cosmic threat, it was his threat now, and Earth, unaware, was already glowing too brightly. The first stars began to flicker from the edge of the nomadic charts. Once stable suns dimmed one by one like candles snuffed out by an invisible wind. Signals from old colonies went silent. The Devourer was no longer approaching, it was closing in. Panic rippled through the fleet, not in noise, but in light. The crystalline halls pulsed with nervous energy. Some ships activated emergency drift modes, preparing to detach and scatter, but something unexpected held many of them back. Marcus, some among the nomads had begun calling him the Spark of Convergence, a symbolic name, a hope. He had sent the warning to Earth, knowing there might be no response. Still, he stood at the center of the storm, refusing to run, and others had chosen to stand with him. In the Council of Light, tension reached its peak. Lyra spoke for the luminaries, urging preparation, not flight. She argued that perhaps for once they could meet the darkness not as prey, but as partners. She didn't mean war, she meant resistance. With allies, Archon Solus remained silent. Then he spoke not to Lyra, but to Marcus. There was more to the prophecy. When the final dawn falters, one born of Earth's flame shall choose dots to carry no weapon, but a will to burn not for survival, but for others. Marcus felt the weight settle in his chest. Not glory, responsibility. He hadn't asked for this, but he'd come too far to remain a bystander. Then, the last connection with Earth failed. The stream of data collapsed into static. Stations near the sun either shut down or were consumed. Marcus stared at the last clean image, a coronal arc bending unnaturally, twisting toward something unseen. The Devourer had breached the outer edge. That night, aboard the observatory wing, Marcus and Lyra stood in silence. Beyond the translucent wall, a nearby star flickered at its edges. It looked sick, its light thinning, as if drained from within. "If we're taken," Marcus said quietly, "let us be the spark for something greater." Lyra's glow pulsed gently beside him. "The brightest light," she said, "is born when all others go dark." The fleet's evacuation protocols accelerated, but not all vessels joined. Some held position, some refused to run. For the first time in millennia, the Nomads had a reason to stop drifting, not in surrender, in defiance. At the edge of the solar system, space bent. The stars behind the fleet stretched unnaturally, warping like reflections in shattered glass. Gravity faltered. Time pulsed strangely, and then it appeared not as a form, but as absence, a massive, undulating shadow devouring light itself. The Devourer of Suns had arrived. The nomadic fleet halted. No more escape. This would be their stand. The vessels reoriented in synchronized silence. Crystal structures rotated, aligned, light sharpened, into weapons. Marcus stood with Lyra in the command spire of the central ship, the Heart vessel, largest and oldest of the fleet. Around them, ships shimmered, preparing for something no nomad had attempted in centuries. Fusion. Archon Solus appeared one last time before the council, his luminous form flickering with age. He addressed them not as a leader, but as memory incarnate. Then he activated the ancient sequence. Across the fleet, the ships extended filaments of energy, veins of golden light, reaching for one another. Slowly, they linked, forming a lattice of pure photon energy, a neural network of consciousness. Each ship became a node, each pilot a thread in the web. Together, they became something more. Marcus felt it the moment the network touched him. It wasn't just thought, it was feeling. Memory, identity. Thousands of voices became one shared awareness. Pain, hope, loss. He was inside it now. And so was Lyra. She reached for his mind gently, and he let her in. At the center of the lattice stood Solus. He alone remained unlinked, anchoring the system manually. The barrier of light needed a stable core, one consciousness to ground it, and that role was fatal. Marcus stepped forward, offering himself. Solus refused. With a final pulse of warmth, solaces dissolved into golden particles, becoming light. His sacrifice stabilized the web. The wall of light ignited. A radiant barrier stretched across space, photonic energy crackling with intensity, forming a shield between the devourer and the inner planets. The entity hesitated, sensing just physical, but conscious. Then it attacked. Waves of nothingness surged forward, gravitational tsunamis that erased whatever they touched. Portions of the barrier buckled. Several ships were consumed, their lights vanishing like candles in a storm, but others held Unity held Dot inside the neural web. Marcus and Lyra conducted the flow like composers, shaping a symphony of light. He felt every ship, every heartbeat, and beyond that, he felt the devourer, and it felt him. Dot. What he sensed was not evil, not hatred. It was imbalance, a hunger written into the laws of nature, a being drawn to consciousness because it had no center of its own, no stillness. It was not destruction, it was instinct, magnified across eternity. In that insight, Marcus saw a possibility, but first, they had to survive the night. The wall of light trembled, held together by will, memory, and shared pain. The barrier continued to deflect the devourer's relentless assaults, yet the strain was visible: fractures of energy, flickering nodes, voices within the neural lattice dimming one by one. Solus's sacrifice had bought time, but not safety. Inside the fusion, Marcus drifted at the edge of himself. His mind was light, yet tethered. Through Lyra, he remained anchored, and through the thousands of minds surrounding them, he felt everything. Each loss, each flame extinguished, each connection fading into silence. But amid that storm, he held onto one spark, the moment of clarity he had seen inside the DEVOURER. It wasn't malevolent, it was broken, a cosmic imbalance, drawn to minds because it had none. A hunger that echoed back to the birth of light itself. And like any force of nature, it could be redirected, not reasoned with, at least guided. Using his knowledge of gravitational harmonics and the Nomad's control of radiation currents, Marcus formulated a last effort. The idea was dangerous, possibly suicidal. Reflect the neural lattice's energy field inward. Not to destroy the devourer, but to lure it away toward a region of deep cosmic void. A gravitational dead zone, where background radiation could feed it endlessly, without harm to stars or life. The Nomads listened. Those still connected voted through resonance pulses. The majority agreed. The lattice pivoted. The fleet, now half its former size, realigned its vessels in a spiral formation. The wall of light inverted, becoming a mirror of radiant gravity. The strain was immense. Marcus felt the very edge of collapse. Then it worked. The devourer slowed. It stretched, twisted its tendrils, drawn not to heat or life, but to the concentrated wave being cast outward. For the first time it moved with hesitation, and then it followed, like a shadow receding before dawn. The entity retreated into the depths of space, folding in on itself, spiraling into the intergalactic void. It didn't vanish, simply left, rebalanced, fed. The battle was over, but the cost had been devastating. Of the nomadic fleet, only a fraction remained. Ships flickered like wounded lanterns in the dark. Minds once part of the network were now gone, gentle lights, snuffed out in the act of saving worlds that would never know their names. Marcus stood once more in the observatory chamber. Earth hung in the distance, fragile and untouched. Behind him, Lyra held out a crystal fragment, a living shard from the heart vessel. It pulsed faintly, still resonant. A seed, she said, a symbol, a beginning. Weeks passed. The remaining Nomads chose not to flee again. Instead, they established themselves in the outer solar system, watchful, rebuilding. Marcus proposed a union, shared technology, hybrid ships, a future between species. Months later, in low Earth orbit, the first human Nomad vessels took shape, part steel, part bioluminescence, pulsing with purpose. From the surface, they looked like new constellations being born. Marcus watched from a viewing deck, hands behind his back, tired but alive. "We didn't just survive," he whispered. "We evolved." And beyond the glass, for the first time in centuries, the universe felt at peace.